Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Discovery Adventures. I am in the Field Museum, but I'm not doing this alone. I, of course, also have Marcy helping.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah. So the theme of the day, we're going to be talking about what animals do in the winter time. It is starting to get colder. We're now solidly in the realm of mid-December. It hasn't been snowing a lot here yet where I am in Chicago, but we're going to see some animals and the different things they do to survive the cold and the snow. If you are watching this live on YouTube, you're going to see there is that awesome chat box there. So if you have any questions throughout our presentation, please feel free to throw those in the chat. And to start with, you can go ahead and generate some things that maybe you do or that you think animals might do to help them survive in winter. What are some things that you do to make the winter more livable when it gets cold outside? What are some things that you notice your pets at home do or maybe animals outside doing? And we'll see what some of those things are. We're going to talk about some of the animals that are on display in the museum. So we're going to be traveling through some different exhibits. Behind me, I have some of my very favorite winter animals in a diorama and Messages of the Wilderness, one of my favorite areas. Does anybody also, out of curiosity, if you haven't already said, does anybody have a guess as to what these wonderful antlered animals are? That's another thing I'd like to know. Oof. And these are also antlers, not horns. I was just talking to somebody who's in exhibits, who's in the museum today, about the difference between horns and antlers, because they are not the same. And one of the big differences is these big branches. So if it has lots of different points, it is an antler, not a horn, which is always really exciting. Oh, and Marcy, actually, can you spotlight the video that has my picture in it? Because it's the other box that's, I think, talking. Yeah, that'll probably be helpful. Thank you.
Sorry about that, everybody. Now you can see the awesome animal behind Anna.
Yeah, that definitely makes it a lot easier to see what's happening. Always an adventure with technology. Yeah.
That is an amazingly massive antler, it seems, Anna.
It sure is. So, oh, here we go. Trina guesses that it is a reindeer and a reindeer antler, and that is exactly right. These are reindeer or caribou. Usually in North America, we call them caribou, but their species does extend into Europe and Asia, all around that Arctic Circle. And so usually we consider the reindeer to be the ones that are in Eurasia and the caribou to be in North America. They are subspecies, so they're not that different, but they're a little bit different because they are geographically isolated. But they're very awesome animals, and they do have these awesome antlers. So when things get extra cold, I mean, they're already in the Arctic area. It's not exactly warm to my mind for the entire year for them. But they will actually escape the cold by moving across great distance. So when animals move across a great distance to find a warmer place, to find a place that has more food, that is considered migration. And you may also know some other migrating animals. If you know any awesome animals that migrate in the winter, usually going south to somewhere that is warmer, feel free to share those in the chat. And all sorts of animals migrate. I actually have whales on my shirt, which is hard to see. But yeah, whales are another animal that migrates. So a lot of animals migrate that we don't always even think about. But the caribou go on one of the biggest migrations in North America. They'll migrate over 2,000 miles. And actually, Marcy can show us on a map what the area that they migrate through looks like. Probably not an area you've traveled to. I certainly don't travel a lot in the northern ranges of Alaska. But that area that they're traveling through, that's all within Alaska, but that range of space is comparable to the size of the entire state of California. So it's a pretty big area. And so you can see that during the summer, they're actually really up north. That little green bubble in that range is actually where they're going to be having their calves. And over the course of the year, they start going further south, where there's going to be easier food to find and less snowpack to get through. Along with the antlers, though, I do want to call attention to one of my other favorite things about the reindeer is that The males and females both have antlers. In the diorama behind me, you can see that all of these deer have antlers. For most deer, only the males have antlers. Reindeer, everybody gets antlers, and they do shed them at different times. So the males, they shed them after the breeding season in October. The females will keep their antlers longer throughout the year until they're having their calves in the spring. So in December, the males have already shed their antlers, females still have their antlers. If you see any reindeer with antlers in December, they are female, just so you know. Fun facts about our friends, the deer. Have we seen any responses in the chat about other types of migrating animals, Marcy? Oh, Marcy, you're muted, by the way.
Thank you so much. Jeff says, bats, exclamation point. Do bats migrate?
They do actually migrate, and I actually have some bats right here. So these are some eastern red bats. And with bats, not all bats migrate. So there's over 1,400 different types of bats. Some of them live in really warm places where they're not going to need to migrate at all. But these bats are ones that are going to usually migrate, but they're finding more and more. This particular bat, this is an eastern red bat. Sometimes these bats are actually just sleeping on the ground. So some bats hibernate in caves, and that's a big issue with white nose syndrome. If you're familiar with that problem that bats are having, the problem with white nose syndrome is when they're sick, they're waking up from their hibernation and they're awake, they're kind of tired because they've been fighting this fungus and they can't find any food. So some bats are in caves taking a nice winter nap. We're going to talk about that next because that's another really big adaptation. But the eastern red bat, they will sometimes be sleeping. They also migrate. So for a long time, they thought they were migrating, especially because we don't see them in caves. But more and more scientists sometimes find them sleeping in the leaf litter on the ground. So these bats might kind of look like a dry, crusty leaf with that reddish orangish color. So they are sometimes sleeping and then opportunistically waking up during the warm weather. There's a lot of scientists that are still trying to study what animals are doing in the winter, because sometimes they're just harder to find. But they're pretty cool.
And Noah says, Anna, the birds migrate. Yeah, a lot of birds migrate.
There are a lot of birds that migrate. That is an awesome observation. And some birds, some of them migrate and some of them don't. I know here in Chicago, and maybe everywhere, you may have seen the Canadian goose. They sometimes migrate, they sometimes don't. Usually there's a range of space where they have figured out that they can survive off of our grasses all year round. But the geese that are living in Canada where it's colder, they still are migrating south for the winter, but some of the geese around me in the Midwest, they're just here all year round, which is kind of silly. All right, we talked a little bit about migrating. With the bats, we did touch on the fact that some animals, they save energy by resting. So some animals will migrate to where the food is, but some animals are just going to take rest or hibernate. We talked about how some bats do that. I'm going to take a look at another animal that takes a nice rest in a den, some famous hibernators. And these are the Alaskan brown bears. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of bears, and they all are potentially going to hibernate on a different schedule depending on how cold it is where they live. In some parts of Alaska, it is very, very cold. Some bears in Alaska will hibernate or stay in their dens, resting, not having as much energy loss because their body temperature is going to go down. They're not necessarily going to eat or drink at all. They will sometimes wake up and shift a little bit. Sometimes we'll go to the bathroom, but they might be in that kind of sleeping state for up to 8 months, which is a really long time, like over half of the year, which is like a really, really long time. I can't imagine. But in some areas where it's less cold, they're going to be doing that for like 5 months or less. It depends. And some bears, like polar bears, are really adapted differently to the cold, so they're not necessarily going to need to hibernate at all in their den. Did we have any questions coming in, Marcy?
Yeah, absolutely. Atrina wonders if sharks migrate. Do you know if sharks migrate?
That's a great question. I am not the most aware of sharks migrating. I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of the animals are going to be moving depending on the seasons, and there's a lot of different types of sharks. But I don't know. That's a good thing to look into. I know other animals in the water like whales migrate. I'm not sure about sharks.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of our experts behind the scenes here are helping us out, and they say that sharks do migrate, and it's all based on water temperature.
That's really
Thanks,
cool.
Jerry. And then Linda wonders if insects migrate.
Yes, so it depends. Some insects do migrate. One of the most famous migrating insects is perhaps these ones, the monarch butterflies. So monarch butterflies go on one of the most amazing migrations. It goes across multiple generations. It'll go from Canada to Mexico. Marcy actually has a map of it that we can pull up. But these insects do migrate, and they will both migrate, and while they are overwintering in Mexico, they do go into a sort of sleepy torpor state. So some animals will do both. They will migrate, but they also take some time to rest at the end of their migration. And everywhere on their migration journey is really important. If you're not familiar with monarchs, they do rely on one type of plant, the milkweed. That's where they're always going to be laying their eggs. So in Chicago, we're at a really important spot on their migration pathway, nicely kind of in the middle. So by having a lot of milkweed anywhere in Chicago, whether it's a flower box on an apartment window or the gardens that we have outside the Field Museum are designed to be good pollinator gardens with a lot of important plants that pollinators are going to be attracted to. You can have a big part in supporting monarchs on their journey. So it's winter right now, not the most exciting time for blooming flowers, but definitely if you're planning a garden for the spring, look into what milkweed might be native to your area and a really good habitat for monarchs and a good spot for them to lay their eggs.
That's
but
awesome.
Monarchs also have a really big migration.
Which one did you say, Anna?
Oh, just the monarchs. Both the monarch and the caribou have two of like the biggest migrations that I know of in North America. They're very impressively long.
Awesome.
They're both over 2,000 miles. The monarch just has to do it across multiple generations.
And Vicki would like to know, Vixie asks us if what you're showing us are real specimens or models.
Oh, that's a great question. These are, I think everything I've showed you today is real specimens. Sometimes we do have models, but that antler was real. It was a shed antler, so it's something that has fallen off of a caribou somewhere. The monarchs are real, the bats are real. We have some other ones we'll look at soon. Those are also real. Everything today is going to be real, which is fun. And any of the dioramas, the skins are real, but obviously these animals are no longer alive. So certain features like their eyeballs, those are going to be replicas. But in general, what we're looking at today is real. Great question.
Thanks, Vicki. Great question. What's next on our travels, Anna?
Yeah, so I have one other dormant animal to talk about, somebody who takes a rest during the winter. This is a very funky animal. So I think a lot of the times I know that I'm thinking about mammals, because I'm a mammal, I find them quite relatable. I'm glad that we had someone asking about insects, but this is a frog. Not everyone thinks about what our frog friends do in the wintertime. This is the wood frog, and some frogs are actually going to take a nice hibernating nap underneath the water. They'll go really deep into the ponds. They might be burrowing into the like stream beds in the mud. And the earth is going to be, the deeper you go on the earth, that's generally the warmer you're going to be able to get. As the air gets colder, the earth will stay warmer. But the wood frog is not going with that plan. The wood frog will actually freeze its whole body, which is very alarming to me. Their blood has a higher level of sugar in it, or glucose. So that enables them to freeze safely. So their whole body becomes frozen. They're closer to the surface. So they also are going to be coming out earlier than most other frogs in the spring because they're closer to the surface. They'll warm back up again sooner. But it's really weird. I highly recommend taking a look online. If you want to look up wood frogs freezing and thawing, you can watch videos of it happening, and it's like really unbelievable. They're pretty funky. So it's really cool. I'm glad we don't actually freeze. But they are actually studying wood frogs, because if we can understand how they're adapted to freeze and thaw safely, because it can do a lot of damage. If you've ever felt really cold, hopefully you've never had hypothermia or frostbite, but we can actually damage and even lose the functionality of some of our tissues if it gets too cold. The wood frog is able to freeze and thaw very safely, and so they're actually studying it so they can learn more about how we might be able to improve organ transplants and organ storage for people so that we can safely freeze them for longer periods of time, which is wild. Very exciting.
That's amazing.
I'm gonna
So
start wheeling. Oh yeah, I'm gonna go on another journey. We're gonna talk about another adaptation to the cold. Woof. So I'm gonna be rolling through the museum on our way there.
Anna, if you wanted to mute yourself while you're rolling, I can answer a few more questions people have. So let's see, some of the questions you have, these are all really great. Linda wonders what antlers are made of. So I have an antler right here that you can see. This is from a white-tailed deer, and it's actually made of bone. So the same thing that like your teeth are made of, it's mostly made out of bone. And you can see at the end right here, this is where it would grow out of their heads. So they grow for a season. And when they're growing, they have a nice velvety skin on them, and they have blood vessels to get to the ends of that bone so they can grow. And then once they are finished growing, that velvet falls off, they help it. And it turns into this nice bone. And by that time, it's pretty much dead. There's no blood coming to it or anything, so it doesn't hurt or anything like that. So great question. And Linda also wonders, with the sea ice melting, would polar bears adapt and migrate? And that's a big question, Linda. We are still trying to figure out and learn what polar bears are going to do, and if they can adapt to this changing environment, or if it's just going to be too fast for them to adapt. There are some polar bears coming into farther southern regions and near where people are living. So we're just going to have to kind of wait and see on that one. And let's see, we have a question about badgers. Atrina, you wonder specifically about badgers. Do they hibernate? And the answer is pretty much badgers do not, but they do enter periods of torpor where like their body will slow down with some sustained inactivity for up around 30 hours. One of the very common animals that people know about that do go through a whole hibernation is the woodchuck or groundhog. And that's when that groundhog wakes up in February. It helps us understand if it's going to stay cold or be spring sooner. So we always want to keep an eye out for those groundhogs around your house. And it looks like Anna has got to their location. I'm so excited to see what you're going to show us this time.
Mute myself. So this is my very favorite winter diorama in the museum, but it's not only a winter diorama. Here we see a bird. This is the willow ptarmigan, which is one of my favorite winter adapted birds. And what's really cool, what just happened before our very eyes, we actually can see this diorama demonstrate that transition as this bird switches from its summer coloration to its winter coloration. So this bird lives pretty far north in parts of Canada. And one thing you might be able to see a little bit in the summer, its feet, you're going to be able to see more of their scaly toes as they like walk around the nice rocky dry ground. In the winter time, they've got a lot of feathers around their feet. They actually are going to work like snowshoes a bit and distribute their weight so they're able to stay on top of the snow and not sink into it as easily. This is also one of my favorite dioramas just because it's really cool that we're able to see that change happen. If anybody is wondering how this really cool sorcery happens because the second diorama is actually above it. And depending on how the lighting is, it'll reflect off of an angled plate in between them. So right now that top one is lit, so we can see it reflecting off of the angled pane that's right there. But if they light the one behind it, which is the winter one, then that's what we'll see. So this is one of my favorite dioramas in the Field Museum. So very excited to show you all that.
And does anybody watching know of any other animals that may change color to help them adapt in winter? Tell us in the chat, I'm curious.
Yeah, because color changing animals are definitely really cool. And the ptarmigan is going to be able to use that color change to hide from predators, but some predators use it to be able to better sneak up on their prey. So I have with me a couple of weasel specimens. So this is the least weasel, and the least weasel is actually the smallest carnivore. So in the summer, they're going to be with that nice brown coat. In the winter, they're going to have this lovely white snowy coat. And these wonderful little tiny carnivores, they are found in the Midwest. You can find them around here and in my home region of Indiana. But yeah, they're a really cool animal that is going to change colors to blend in with that snow in the wintertime. Did we have any other things that people have been typing in the chat, Marcy?
Absolutely. Ghost Fire says foxes, K Pepper says rabbits, and Elizabeth says specifically the snowshoe hare.
Oh yeah, those are all really great examples. And I like that we have both foxes and rabbits, snowshoe hares, because that is definitely, I think, something where we can see those predator-prey relationships. And I'm actually going to be able, for our kind of last thing to look at, we're going to be able to see some of those foxes that we were talking about. So we do have a really nice fox display over here. And you can see that those are two different color morphs of the Arctic fox, or color phases. So you've got that white one for like solidly wintertime Arctic fox. And then this one that's closer to me is more like what they're going to look like in the summer. So they're going to be that kind of darker, browner color, less blendy to the snow, because the snow's not always there.
That's amazing. And if anybody wants to see a really fun video, I would definitely Google Arctic foxes hunting, because they can actually hear mice under the snow, and then they locate them using their sound and smell, and then jump straight into the snow head first to try to catch these. It's a really fun video and a fun adaptation they have.
Those are really
and we have one more question from Child Life asks if geckos change color, and the answer is absolutely, geckos change color. But that's more to blend in to their environment, like the Arctic fox would do in the snow. So they don't need to change those colors for the winter, but they definitely change those colors to keep from being eaten.
They're definitely, I know when I was in Florida too, I don't know as much about geckos, but some of the anoles and lizards that would live there, they would have like some small color shifts that did seem to help with thermoregulation. So if it was like colder and they're darker, they're going to be able to get more of that sun warmth, heating up their bodies, which is helpful.
Oh, that's really great. Awesome, Anna.
Yeah.
Well, we have about 5 more minutes, Anna. If there are any other animals you'd like to tell us about, or does anybody have any other questions they would like to ask us?
We are across from some really fun skeletons of antlers. I'm just going to wheel over there. I think they're fun.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is a deer. This is the deer family. This is the American elk, is a species, but this is like, you know, another member of that deer family, but you can see the like connection of the antler to the skull there, which is really cool.
Absolutely. And we also, some animals, similar to a lot of humans, just kind of hunker down in the winter and will change their diet, like the white-tailed deer. We saw these antlers earlier. They'll eat more bark and things like that and dried items than they would have in the summer, but they often just stick around where they are. Of course, some humans also migrate in the winter as well.
This is true. I know a lot of people take this time to take trips to warmer places for sure.
Jeff would like to know, do any animals cluster together in winter for warmth?
Oh yeah, so bats we've talked about a little bit earlier. So bat colonies and like caves, they're going to be clustered for warmth a lot of the time. Also bees, they are animals that are going to be able to group together in their colonies to stay warm. Another example is the penguins, and they're not far from me, so I'm actually just going to pop over to the penguins really fast. I don't know if anybody's ever seen March of the Penguins or even Happy Feet. Both of those movies have some pretty nice depictions of the ways the penguins will be in those big groups to protect each other. Oops, sorry, from the cold. So there we go. Here are some penguins. So these are, I also like this diorama because these penguins were some of the first penguins brought back out of Antarctica. And they lived at Brookfield Zoo, and then after they died there, they were preserved for the museum's display. So yeah, these are emperor penguins, and they're an example of those penguins that will cluster in big groups to survive the cold winters.
And then Christina wonders which animal hibernates the longest. I don't know the answer to that. Do you, Anna?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think I know. Oh, but I feel like I've maybe almost seen this somewhere. I don't exactly know, but that's a great question. The longest hibernation that I've come into like awareness of recently was just that Alaskan brown bear. Seemed like a long time for 8 months, but that's also not the deepest type of hibernation. Some animals are going to be like, there's also some different terms that people will use to delineate the like intensity of the sleep, because for some purposes, you might consider hibernation to be only true hibernation. So not all sleeps are considered to be hibernation by all scientists. Like any labeling word, there's different people are drawing the lines in different places. But I don't know, that's a great question. Good thing to look into. Well, actually, yeah. I have a question. Does it count as hibernation for like the cicada cycle? Is that considered a hibernation? Because that's multiple years.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sam just guessed cicadas on here. So yeah, I guess it depends on like how, if you're an animal that can go dormant or for a really, really long time, or if it's a hibernation that we think about to kind of sleep through the winter. So great questions. And finally, I think we have time for one more. Noah wonders how the Field Museum gets our animals.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It absolutely varies a lot. Our animals have come historically from a lot of different sources, and we do continue to get animals. So today, a lot of our animals come from zoos and aquariums when they pass away. We do have relationships with a lot of different departments of natural resources, so sometimes different roadkill will come to us. There's volunteers in Chicago that pick up dead birds that have hit windows. There are also scientists that will collect animals for their research, but whenever we do that type of collecting, it has to be done in like ethical and sustainable ways with approval from a lot of different governments or wherever the site may be. There's always different people that we need to get the approval from. Yeah, so it depends. These ones are penguins that we used to live at the zoo and they died and they came here. What other animals did we see today? The bats that I have, these I believe were picked up by the same people that pick up the dead birds. They also found dead bats. And they're like, okay, we will also bring these to the museum. But yeah, it depends. Great question.
Great. That's awesome. And we have some expert feedback on the longest hibernation. Ghostfire looked up and said that bats actually have been known to hibernate for 344 days. And that's confirmed by our expert, Rebecca, that bats have been known to have the longest hibernation time. And apparently cicadas are not actually hibernating, but are actually active underground and tunneling and feeding before they actually emerge into their adult stage. That is really, really great
That is
to
really
know
exciting.
that information. Yeah, I never knew that. Always learning something new. And thank you, our audience, for all this really good information. Keep going out there and learning and discovering. We'd love to learn from you, for you to share your information with us. And with that note, we're unfortunately out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. Anna, thank you for being there at the museum for us to see these amazing dioramas.
Yeah, this has been really fun. I'm really excited about all the new things I learned today from this too.
Awesome. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, have fun, stay curious. Have a good winter, everybody.